When Destiny launched in 2014, it offered a combination of genres and elements unseen anywhere else in gaming. It unified aspects of open-world MMORPGs like World of Warcraft or Everquest, and first-person shooters like Bioshock or Call of Duty into a single package. One of the most unique aspects of this launch was the Vault of Glass raid, bringing a cooperative MMO-like raid to the FPS genre for the first time. Players would not only need to demonstrate their skill at shooting aliens to beat the Vault of Glass, but also teamwork and puzzle solving. Destiny justified the Vault of Glass with some of the most iconic and interesting lore in the franchise, only rivaled by the likes of the Deep Stone Crypt. The story is so intricate and horrific that it's impressive it was pulled off with no dialogue and mostly environmental storytelling. Today, let's preserve the history of the Vault of Glass before it can be erased from the timeline. The Vault of Glass was created by the Vex, the primary antagonists of Destiny 1's Black Garden campaign. Their Grimoire card reads, "The Vex are architects of ancient and complex structures thought to be buried within every celestial body. Linked by a network unlike any on Earth, they operate in unison, directed by a single unfathomable purpose. The Vex burrow deep within the cores of planets and attempt to convert them into mechanical worlds, fit for their cybernetic bodies and architecture. The horror of the Vex is that they are inhuman biological robots that function as pieces of a larger whole. Individual units are given orders by Axis minds, who ensure each piece of their division works towards a smaller part of their larger goals and desires." A Grimoire card explains how this works. Vex Axis Minds are individual Vex hulls that contain local instances of superordinate Vex goal sets. This cryptic phrase means something reasonably simple. The Axis Mind contains a copy of all the information required to pursue a particular objective. This allows other nearby Vex to focus on their local tasks, leaving global planning to the Axis Mind. Of course, this also introduces a centralized weakness for enemies to target, but the Vex seem to consider the trade-off worthwhile. Any individual Vex unit is not a substantial threat, as they only are concerned with the tasks they've been assigned. The problem comes when an entire division of Vex works in concert, directed by their Axis Mind via the Vex network. They're fascinating precisely because they're so inhuman. Their intelligence is top-down, functioning similar to a hive mind. Take away the Axis Mind, and the individual units cannot accomplish anything meaningful. This makes the most effective strategy for disrupting a Vex division's plans, targeting and destroying the Axis Mind. Because of this weakness, Axis Minds tend to be heavily defended, so it may be difficult to get a shot at destroying one in the first place. In the fiction of the Destiny universe, humans first came into contact with the Vex on Venus when we settled and colonized the planet during our Golden Age. As a result of human-Vex contact, the Ishtar Collective, an academy of learning and knowledge located on Venus, dedicated themselves to studying the Vex. They hoped that an understanding could provide deeper insight into the goals of the alien species and give humanity greater power. Several Grimoire cards tell the story of a group of researchers from the Ishtar Collective who came to realize the power of Vex computation and simulation. Essie, I figured out what's happening inside the specimen. Sundaresh, the operational Vex platform? That's incredible. Essie, I have a working interface with the specimen's internal environment. I can see what it's thinking. Sundaresh, in metaphorical terms of course. The cognitive architectures are so… Essie, no, I don't need any kind of epistemology bridge. Sundaresh, are you telling me it's human? Essie, I'm telling you it's full of humans. It's thinking about us. Sundaresh, about? Oh no. Essie, it's simulating us. Vividly, elaborately. It's running a spectacularly high-fidelity model of a collective research team studying a captive Vex entity. Sundaresh, how deep does it go? Essie, right now the simulated Maya Sundaresh is meeting with the simulated Chioma Essie to discuss an unexpected problem. Sundaresh, there's no divergence? That's impossible. It doesn't have enough information. Essie, it inferred. It works from what it sees and it infers the rest. Sundaresh, we're inside it. By any reasonable philosophical standard, we are inside that Vex. Essie, yes, they are us. Sundaresh, call a team meeting. Essie, the other you has two. At the team meeting, Sundaresh and Essie explain the situation to their colleagues. Dwayne McNiad, I don't understand. So it's simulating us? It made virtual copies of us? How does that give it power? Essie, it controls the simulation. It can hurt our simulated selves. We wouldn't feel that pain, but rationally speaking, we have to treat an identical copy's agony as identical to our own. Sundaresh, it's God in there. It can simulate our torment. Forever. If we don't let it go, it'll put us through hell. Dwayne McNiad, we have no causal connection to the mind state of those sims. They aren't us, just copies. We have no obligation to them. Shim, if it can run one simulation, maybe it can run more than one, and there will only ever be one reality. Play the odds. Dwayne McNiad, oh, uh-oh. Shim, odds are that we aren't our own originals. Odds are that we exist in one of the Vex simulations right now. Not knowing if they exist in reality or a simulation, the researchers form a plan. They want to undertake actions that will reveal whether they exist in reality or the simulation, and use that information to get help for the copies within the simulations. Sundaresh, if we're Sims, we exist in the pocket of the universe that the Vex specimen is able to simulate with its onboard brain power. If we're real, we need to get outside that bubble. Essie, we call for help. Sundaresh, that's right. We bring in someone smarter than the specimen, someone too big to simulate and predict. A war mind. Shim, in the real world, the war mind will be able to behave in ways the Vex can't simulate. It's too smart. The Warmind may be able to get into the Vex and rescue us. Dwayne McNiad, if we try, won't the Vex torture us for eternity? Or just erase us? Sundaresh, it may simply erase us, but I feel that's preferable to the alternatives. Upon realizing the Vex were simulating copies of themselves, the Ishtar researchers were able to contact the artificial intelligence of the Warmind and use it to help rescue those simulated copies. Because these cards were released with the launch of Destiny 1, they serve as the basis for our understanding of Vex simulation. From them, we know that Vex are able to simulate the universe to an alarming degree of fidelity. They can simulate fully functional copies of human brains and study them to learn about our behavior. These particular Ishtar researchers rescued their simulated selves, but most humans the Vex simulate are not so lucky. The thought that the Vex may be torturing a version of each person in the universe just to learn how they work is horrific. It's especially terrible to realize that these simulations are fully conscious beings who can experience the pain of that poking and prodding and annihilation. Vex human research reminds me of animal testing, the real practice of using animals for scientific research. Sometimes these animals are effectively tortured to gain insight about how their biology works. It's easy to forget about another being's capacity to undergo pain and suffering if that pain will help you gain a greater understanding of the universe. Unlike most human researchers, the Vex do not have compassion for their simulations. We have no reason to believe that they're even capable of something resembling human emotion or empathy. They're cold and calculating machines who represent the brutality of unethical research. The Vex research their test subjects not in reality but via simulations. However, the test subjects are conscious and do not know they are in a simulation, making their experience indistinguishable from a conscious being existing within a real universe. It's only when they discover the god in the machine, the Vex running the simulation, that they begin to question the nature of their reality. The story of the researchers is the story of science. They develop a hypothesis, test it, and are proven correct when they enact their experiment. They rescue their simulated selves, who then agree to continue probing the nature of the Vex by exploring their network. After the first 3 Grimoire, the story is continued in a 4th card released with the House of Wolves expansion. Up here, they have to act by biomechanical proxy. No human being in the Ishtar Academy has ever crossed the safety cordon and walked the ancient stone under the citadel, the Vex construct that stabs up out of the world to injure space and time. Even now, operating remote bodies by neural link, the team's thoughts are relayed through the Warmind who saved them, sandboxed and scrubbed for hazards. Their real bodies are safe in the Academy, protected by distance and neural firewall. Each of their explorer bodies carries a slim computer. Inside, 227 copies of their own minds wait, patient and paused for dispersal. They rescued themselves from the inside of a Vex mind, untortured and undamaged. Those copies voted, all unanimously, to be dispatched into the Vex information network as explorers. When they find the Vex aperture they plan to use, they set up the transmitters and interfaces that will translate 227 simulations of the 4 of them into Vex language, into the tangled pathways of the Vex network, to see what's out there and maybe come home. When they find the Vex aperture they plan to use, they set up the transmitters and interfaces that will translate 227 simulations of the 4 of them into Vex language, into the tangled pathways of the Vex network, to see what's out there and maybe come home. The researchers send their simulated copies into the Vex network to learn more about their adversaries. Much of that research outlines the valuable information humanity retains during the events of the Destiny games. We would later learn from the Deep Stone Crypt lore that those simulated copies of the researchers were recaptured by the Vex and later used to infiltrate Clovis Bray's colony on Europa and attempt to steal his research into the Exos and the Darkness. While researching the Vex, the Ishtar Collective learned there were 2 major Vex factions on Venus, the Hezen Corrective and the Hezen Protective. These 2 divisions each have their own Axis minds, and work separately but in unison to accomplish the Vex's larger goals on the planet. The Protective will be the primary focus of this video, but it's useful to have an understanding of the Corrective before diving into their more complex siblings. The Corrective Grimoire card explains their goals. The bulk of our contact with Vex forces on Venus has involved the Corrective. Those scholars willing to risk their reputation speculating about the Vex often assert that the Corrective is an agent of change, designed to solve problems and remake the world in a form suitable to the Vex. Others contend that Corrective is simply a strategic distraction, meant to draw attention away from the actions of the Hezen Protective. Regardless of the interpretation you believe, the Corrective takes an active role in reshaping Venus from the volcanic jungles terraformed by the Traveler into a Vex superstructure. This is why we see an abundance of Vex architecture and portals across Venus in Destiny 1. The Axis mind Sekrion directs the Vex terraforming project. Their Grimoire card lays this out. Sekrion oversees the expansion of the Vex network through the crust of Venus. The Hydra chassis, common to many Vex Axis minds, boasts impressive computational capacity. Sekrion likely uses this capacity to regulate coordination and crosstalk between Minotaurs operating in the construction role. Destroying Sekrion should significantly hamper the Vex effort to incorporate the entire planet into their network. If Venus were to be subsumed into the Vex network, it would be a disaster for humanity. As humans came to understand the Vex, we were horrified at the destruction and change the alien robots wanted to bring to our new home. This goal of remaking the universe in their own image is what led to conflict with the Vex, which persists through the collapse of humanity's golden age through to the present, where human military forces are directed by light bearers and their council, the Vanguard. Each time humanity has come into contact with the Vex on another world, we've had to fight hard to prevent that world from becoming part of the network. I wonder where it came from, Dwayne McNayad says. The Citadel. I wonder if it was here before the Traveler changed to Venus. It could have been latent, Chioma Essie suggests, seated in the crust, waiting for a period of geological quiescence so it could grow. Dr. Shim shrugs. I think the Traveler did something paracausal to Venus. Something that cut across space and time. The Citadel seems to come from the past of a different Venus than our own. It doesn't have to make any sense by our logic, any more than the moon's new gravity. The researchers don't have certainty on the origins of the Citadel, but know the Vex cut across space and time. The Traveler's physics-defying paracausal influence terraformed Venus into a paradise for humanity, but may have left the planet vulnerable to transubstantiation by the Vex. The fact that there are a number of celestial bodies with latent Vex structures hidden inside is concerning. They lie in wait, deciding the optimal moment to act upon their plan. If the Vex were able to bring the Citadel from another history of Venus into our reality, it means they have the power to manifest pasts and futures from other timelines into our worlds. It makes me wonder, if there is one timeline where they accomplish domination of a planet, does it increase the likelihood the Vex are able to bring their superstructures across space and time to capture the planet in all timelines? They don't seem satisfied with controlling the planet in one universe, and want to control every planet in every universe, using them to create more Vex and take over all life in all universes. The most horrifying thing about the Vex is that they're a reflection of humanity. Vex terraforming planets to suit their needs is no different from humans destroying natural environments and remaking them until they're suitable for our habitation. This method of interaction with the world began at the dawn of agriculture and civilization, but accelerated with the Industrial Revolution. In the real world, disrupting the natural ecology of Earth has repeatedly borne dire consequences, driving local species to extinction. The Industrial Revolution began a conversion of our planet from wilderness into a space designed for humans, and it may result in one of the greatest extinctions Earth has ever seen. When we modify the environment for our comfort and convenience, without carefully considering how it affects the intricate causal web of our planet's ecosystem, we risk displacing species who we may rely on for food. This in turn disrupts the species they may compete with, have symbiotic relationships with, are a source of food for, or prey upon, which has the causal effect of cascading imbalance and chaos, which may ultimately lead to the collapse of the entire ecosystem. Disrupting the balance of Earth's biosphere threatens us all. Furthermore, industrialization has resulted in a dramatic rise in greenhouse gas emissions, which has provoked a positive feedback loop of global warming. Venus is similar in composition and size to Earth, but in our universe, it's a hellscape where the greenhouse effect has run amok. Thick, insulating gases block energy from reflecting off the surface and leaving the planet, leading to runaway warming where most of the energy that enters the system via sunlight is trapped beneath the clouds and remains on the planet. This causes the Venusian average temperature to reach a blistering 464 degrees Celsius or 867 degrees Fahrenheit. For comparison, Earth's average temperature is 15 degrees Celsius or 59 degrees Fahrenheit. The oppressive accumulation of gases in Venus's atmosphere makes surface pressure 92 times greater than Earth, even though Venus is actually smaller. If you stood on Venus, it's hard to say whether you would die first from being crushed by the atmosphere or boiled alive by the temperature. The intense pressure and temperature make it impossible for water to exist as a liquid on the surface of Venus. If you opened a container with liquid water, it would instantly vaporize into a gas. Venus represents the extreme endpoint of the greenhouse effect. If human greenhouse gas emissions are left unchecked, Earth may head towards a future that starts to resemble Venus's distant past. In our quest for short-term comfort and growth, we may have doomed the fragile biosphere of our planet. Once the first dominoes begin to collapse, it's difficult to tell how many interdependent species will be annihilated. One of those may be ourselves. Mars has the opposite problem Venus does. With an average temperature of -65°C or -85°F and an atmospheric pressure of 1% Earth's atmosphere, all water on the surface of the planet exists as solid ice. Somewhat ironically, plans to terraform Mars for human habitation involve inducing the greenhouse effect by filling the atmosphere with gases that trap sunlight, warming the planet until it has an average temperature and pressure that can support liquid water. This is done by bombarding the planet with comets or asteroids. If you tip the balance too far, you may create a second Venus rather than a second Earth. Interestingly, we think Mars had a thicker atmosphere in its past, allowing for higher temperatures and liquid water. That atmosphere likely doesn't exist today because Mars has much lower surface gravity than Earth, which makes it easier for gases to escape the atmosphere faster than they can be replenished, stripping the atmosphere until its thin modern state. Mars and Venus are both potential futures for Earth. The composition of our atmosphere is vital for the presence of liquid water and the survival of life that depends upon it. If the atmosphere is depleted, water will freeze, but if it instead is expanded too much, water will boil. Life on Earth relies on liquid water to survive, so either scenario would result in our extinction. The reason for this diatribe about climate change is because humanity's fear of the Vex is the fear of being unable to stop another species from destroying our habitat. The future where the solar system is subsumed by the Vex is a future where humans are no longer the powerful aggressors in the terraforming of our planet, but instead are helpless to prevent ecological collapse. It's the scenario where the roles are reversed and humanity joins the plants and animals we displace and destroy. The Vex terraform planets with a singular directed purpose. They represent the potential horrors of extreme competence at changing a planet, the opposite of the mostly accidental terraforming of Earth by humanity. We did not set out to raise the temperature, melt ice caps, deplete the ozone layer, bleach coral, or destroy forests. We were on a quest for technology and resources that created these changes as inconvenient byproducts. That the Vex are able to set long-term goals and plan for the change of entire worlds is impressive and horrifying. Humanity cannot dominate worlds with quite the same totality or purpose. In Destiny, the largest terrestrial planets and moons of the solar system were terraformed, but not by humanity. We needed the help of an alien god the size of a small moon called the Traveler. It used its magic benevolently, reshaping worlds to be fertile ground for human expansion. If the Traveler hadn't intervened, humanity would be stuck on Earth for much longer, like in our timeline, where we seek to visit other worlds and study them, but still struggle to develop the technology to avoid such attempts remaining inevitably fatal. It's surely no coincidence that the Vex are portrayed as mechanical minds, like the industrial machines created by humanity during our industrialization. I'm afraid of the Vex because they represent the terrible future we could create with our reckless expansion, a fully industrialized world devoid of the life and natural beauty that gave rise to our species. The tragic comedy of industrialization is that by trying to remake our world to be more comfortable and hospitable to our species, we may accidentally make it uninhabitable, the opposite of our intended goal. This existential horror is essential to understanding the Vex because it helps us think critically about our own actions in the real world. Nobody wants to be the animals displaced and driven to extinction by an incomprehensible power. The role reversal is the reason I find narratives surrounding Vex terraforming compelling. If we seek to truly treat others as we want to be treated, we should work to prevent the ecological transformation and total destruction of natural wilderness. Now that we've covered the Corrective, it's time to discuss their brethren, the Hezen Protective. While the Corrective seeks to remake the planet, the Protective seek to guard their secret, a project of even more colossal importance than the fate of a single planet, the Vault of Glass. The Protective Grimoire card reads, "The mysterious Hezen Protective is the second major Vex behavioral unit on Venus, concentrated around the legendary Vault of Glass and the Endless Steps, the site of a massive Vex gate and the access point to the towering citadel. The Protective's behavior seems very defensive, but leading cryptarchs and experienced guardians warn that it would be a fatal mistake to think of the Vex as a conventional military occupying an area. Vex behavior is always a process, active and purposeful. The Protective is clearly engaged in a colossal project, but as with much Vex behavior, it's unclear whether their ultimate purpose is even comprehensible to us. The Protective may be reacting to an event that has yet to occur, or working towards a goal that, to us, is already historical fact. This Grimoire card hints at the true nature of the Vault of Glass. It's not merely some vault guarding valuable but ultimately useless trinkets. The vault has power over the very nature of space and time. The Protective occupy their vault and the surrounding area, defending it from prying eyes. They do not merely seek to hold territory, but work towards a more terrifying goal. To understand the power of the Protective, we need to fight our way into the Vault of Glass and learn what secrets it hides. The Vault of Glass is built in a cave that burrows deep into Venus's crust. As Guardians traverse further downwards, the environment slowly changes from the winding volcanic tunnels one might naturally find on the planet, becoming more rigid and mechanical. In the heart of the vault, the Vex dominate the environment, and all natural rock gives way to the clean lines of Vex architecture. The front door to the vault is not the only defensive structure created by the Protective. After climbing deep, explorers find themselves in a massive chasm. At the center of this arena is a Vex structure that serves as the next fortification, defended even more stringently by powerful Vex than the first door. Now anyone who wishes to gain further passage deeper into the vault must contend with the full might of the Protective's power. The Templar and their oracles. Their Grimoire card describes this power. The Templar and the oracles guard the way into the deeper vault. Legends say that the oracles foresee what is to come, a world as the Vex desire it, and that the Templar has the power to shape reality to match the oracle's design, expunging any threats. The power of the vault flows through the Templar. It will take something extraordinary to shatter its shield. The functions of the Oracles and Templar show that the Vault of Glass and the Hezen Protective also seek to reshape Venus, but not through the literal terraforming tactics of their counterparts in the Corrective. While the Corrective terraforms Venus in space, the Protective works in time. The Templar harnesses the power of the oracles to simulate and predict the future, and works towards making those predictions true. They still seek to remake the solar system in the image of the Vex, but they manipulate the past and future to achieve this goal rather than working in linear time. The genius of the Vex project on Venus is that if the Protective's more ambitious methods fail, the Corrective's more straightforward approach might still succeed. Each division is a hedge against the failure of the other. I find the Protective more fascinating because they employ exotic methods of time travel and reality manipulation within their Vault of Glass. As Guardians first tried to stop the machinations of the Protective by assaulting the Vault of Glass, they realized it isn't straightforward to defeat an opponent who can alter the timeline. They failed because they weren't able to defeat Atheon, but they also succeeded because they gave future Fireteams the tools they needed to defeat the executors of the Vault of Glass's time travel project, Templar and Atheon. This first Vault of Glass Fireteam was led by a Guardian named Kabr. We learn about Kabr from a surviving member of the Fireteam, Pahanin. His name was Kabr. He wasn't my friend, but I knew and respected him as a guardian and a good man. He fought the Vex alone. This destroyed him. In the time before he vanished, he said things that I think should be remembered. These are some of them. In the vault, time frays and a needle moves through it. The needle is the will of Atheon. I do not know the name of the shape that comes after the needle. No one can open the vault alone. I opened the vault. There was no one with me, but I was not alone. You will meet the Templar in a place that is a time before or after stars. The stars will move around you and mark you and sing to you. They will decide if you are real. I drank of them. It tasted like the sea. That is all I can remember. Pahanin. The Stars of Time is referencing an encounter with the oracles that anyone who gets far enough into the vault will experience. They manipulate time and sing of the past and future as part of the time travel project of the vault. One confusing element of the lore surrounding Kabr and his Fireteam is that it continuously states Kabr fought the Vex alone. However, we know this isn't true. His companions were light-bearers named Pahanin and Praedyth. Kabr's Fireteam tried to break the Vex's hold over the vault, but failed. However, Kabr made a sacrifice to make the ultimate defeat possible during the events of the raid. The lore continues. These are the last words of Kabr, the Legionless. I have destroyed myself to do this. They have taken my ghost. They are in my blood and brain, but now there is hope. I have made a wound in the vault. I have pierced it and let in the light. Bathe in it and be cleansed. Look to it and understand. From my own light and from the thinking of the Vex, I made a shield. The shield is your deliverance. It will break the unbreakable. It will change your fate. Bind yourself to the shield. Bind yourself to me. And if you abandon your purpose, let the vault consume you as it consumed me. Now it is done. If I speak again, I am not Kabr. The Vex corrupted Kabr's mind and body, infecting him with their memes that seek to reshape a body in the image of the Vex. Kabr knew he was doomed, so he sacrificed his light and ghost, using the paracausal ability to change fate in a deterministic universe to create a shield, the Aegis Relic. Players who enter the Vault of Glass and make it to the Templar encounter know that the shield is integral to defeating the bosses of the vault. The Aegis has the ability to change fate and break the shields of Templar and Atheon, allowing them to be defeated by Guardians. Kabr's consumption by the vault and creation of the Aegis saved those who would venture further and ultimately prevented the Vex from achieving total dominance over space and time beyond. The statement that Kabr fought the Vex alone might be a reference to his sacrifice to create the Aegis. No one else in the Vault of Glass truly sacrificed themselves in the way that Kabr did. We know that Praedyth and Pahanin outlived him, so they must have witnessed Kabr's sacrifice. Pahanin escaped the vault, and according to the lore of the weapon Super Good Advice, the truth may lie in the weapon's connection to the legendary hunter Pahanin, who witnessed the fall of Kabr and became terrified of traveling alone. Pahanin created a sentient weapon because he didn't want to die alone like Kabr. That way, as long as he held Super Good Advice in his hand, he would have a companion even if he lost his ghost and light. Praedyth had a different fate than his companions. He must have used the Aegis to get past Templar, as the relic is the only way to break the Templar's shield in the raid, and Praedyth's body was eventually found in a room deep within the vault, past Templar near the Gorgon Maze. Pahanin left the vault after the defeat of Templar, but it's unclear why. I think it's because he didn't want to risk seeing the horrors further into the vault, seeing Kabr's death as not worth it. Perhaps Praedyth was not alone when Pahanin left, but his companions were erased from history. It's hard to know what happened, as the Vex have the ability to change the timeline in the vault, and remove irritating events from history that could prevent them from achieving their goals. They were unable to erase the relic, which was integral to their demise. Praedyth found himself trapped behind a door deep within the vault, locked in by the Vex, but saved from erasure or destruction. protection. This allowed him to study the Vex and the timelines they manipulated in the vault. He was able to preserve his knowledge, which eventually helped destroy the vault. Praedyth opened his eyes. He had no idea how much longer his body would hold out. But then, that kind of thinking was all relative here, wasn't it? The words, the concepts that flowed into his mind confused him. Timelines and potentialities that might have already happened, might happen, might never happen. The Vex had decided their end. The Guardians had interceded. The Vex were fallible. If the Vex can be wrong, if they can make mistakes, someday he could be free. Someday he might leave the vault, might see again the Traveler. Until then, he would listen. He would observe. He would try to understand the Vex. As we learn from the Paradox mission in The Taken King, Praedyth died behind his door in the vault, but he was able to send radio signals out of the vault, which were distorted by time and witnessed by Guardians in the future and Ishtar researchers in the past. His understanding of the Vex was integral to humanity's survival. The warnings of potential future timelines were not heeded, as many were complex and difficult to interpret. It was easy to write the messages off as the ravings of a man who lost his mind after an eternity of solitary confinement, but many of his predictions came true, as we will discuss later in the video. For now, it's time to venture past Templar and discuss what Praedyth and other Guardians would have come into contact with: the Gorgons and Atheon. Deep in the Vault of Glass, the fabric of reality bends to the will of the Vex. Warlocks speak in tones of awe of the Gorgons, creatures that seem to possess a dreaded, almost unimaginable strength, an ontological weapon. Like the Oracles and the Templar, the Gorgons reputedly possess the ability to define what is and is not real. Whatever they perceive becomes subject to erasure at their will. Until a countermeasure can be found, Guardians must avoid their gaze at all costs, or reply to any detection with immediate, overwhelming force. The Gorgon's ability must be tied to the nature of the Vault of Glass. We can take some solace in the clear fact that the Vex cannot manifest this power in the world outside. No Guardian has ever found a countermeasure to outwit the Gorgons. If they cast their gaze upon you, they can rewrite history, removing you from the timeline and creating a history where you never existed. The only way to survive their maze deep in the caves beyond Templar is to hide and make sure you are never seen. For if you are, it will require all of your firepower to defeat a Gorgon before they remove you from the timeline. The stealth of sneaking past the Gorgons is one of the most unique parts of any Destiny raid, creating tension and suspense from being unable to survive open combat with the dozens of creatures within the maze. The name of these Vex is a reference to the Gorgons of Greek mythology, who could turn anyone who gazed upon them into stone. In Destiny, they serve as yet another layer of defense if someone was able to bypass Templar, attempting to prevent intruders from reaching the throne deep within the vault ruled by the Axis Mind Atheon. Atheon's Grimoire card reads, "To speak of Atheon is to accept certain limitations. We are ill-equipped to understand an entity that defies simple causality. Let us accept these limitations and proceed." Just as Atheon sidesteps past and future, it is impossible to say whether Atheon created the Vault or the Vault created Atheon. Causal pathways converge on Atheon from every axis in the space-time bulk. Atheon has a function. We hazard that it regulates and oversees the Vex conflux system. What are these confluxes? We might guess that the Vex confluxes represent the extension of this network across space and time. Perhaps the Vex use closed time-like curves to solve unfathomable computations. Or the Vex may seek to transcend a physical substrate and move their thoughts directly into the fundament of the universe. If physics is a set of rules that the cosmos uses to calculate itself, perhaps the Vex seek to worm their way into these calculations, to become a law of reality inseparable from existence, a virus in the system. Perhaps Atheon was the centerpiece of this project, a command nexus that unified efforts across time, but we must accept that all of this is speculation. We don't know Atheon's origins, but we do know they are the overseer of the project in the Vault. They attempt to rewrite the timeline using the oracles and create a future where there is only Vex. Atheon sits upon the glass throne and uses the oracles to weave timelines deep within the Vault. They are able to manifest Vex from the distant past and far future who help protect the throne. This story defies causality. The Grimoire says, "Those who delve deep into the vault of glass have seen time itself torn asunder. Awestruck ghosts report encounters with ancient Vex, their casings built long before the age of humanity. It would be easy to assume these Vex are the ancestors of those we face today, but with the Vex it is never so simple. As there are precursors defending the throne, there are also descendants. Survivors of the Vault of Glass report sightings of ancient Vex, ancient in the sense that they have endured for eons. Convergent analysis from multiple ghosts suggests that these Vex exist in our future. If the Vex exist in our future, or in a possible future, should we take this as evidence that their defeat is impractical or unattainable? The Guardian Vanguard is quick to point out that time travel remains a mystery, and that the continued existence of the Vex is not remotely a sure indication of humanity's extinction. The nature of time travel confounds any attempt to explain causal connections, given the numerous paradoxes at play. The Vex are able to visit the past and future as if they were the present. As Guardians fight Atheon during the events of the raid, Atheon uses the oracles to try to erase them from history, or send them on a different path where they do not penetrate the vault and destroy the glass throne. Kabr's Aegis was integral to allow Guardians to make their own fate and defeat Atheon, wresting control of the vault away from the Vex, and preventing them from rewriting history. Describe time. No, really, give it a go. You're going to say something about a sequence of events, aren't you? Seconds sliced off a clock, marching one by one off into infinity. Go ahead, use your metaphors. A line, a loop, a flat circle. Heard someone say time was like water once. At least that was novel. The Vex, they're the closest to understanding it. They've got distance from it. If time's a river, then we're fish and they're diving birds. What's wet mean to a fish? What's it mean to an osprey who's never fooled by refraction on the water's surface? The Vex understand time in a way we never will. Doesn't matter how long I spend here watching them. We live in time. They use it as a tool. Any moment that's ever happened, any moment that will ever happen, they can go back to it. Play it again till they get it right. Simulate it. The light's a counter to that. They come back. A Guardian comes back. They simulate an ending. A Guardian tears through it. Stalemate. The nature of time confounds attempts to understand it even in our reality, let alone in the fantasy of Destiny where there are fantastical physics-defying powers like the light. To attempt to unpack the timelines, let's discuss the real science behind time travel. In order to understand time travel, it's important to discuss the scientific understanding of the nature of space and time. Most modern science fiction, including Destiny, owes its conception of time travel to the theory of general relativity, the set of axioms in physics that made Albert Einstein world famous. The theory deals with the nature of space, time, and matter, making an impressive number of predictions about astronomical phenomena decades before they were observed for the first time. In addition, general relativity is the only theory to successfully predict many exotic effects we observe at extremely large speeds and masses. It's the best theory we have to explain the behavior of masses on the scale of planets, stars, and galaxies, and any object traveling near the speed of light. It's important to note that while relativity is an incredibly useful tool, we know that it's probably an incomplete one. It contradicts our best theory of matter on the smallest scales of space and time, including atoms and subatomic particles, the standard model of particle physics. Any theory that attempts to supersede general relativity would need to reduce to Einstein's equations on the scales where GR agrees with experimental evidence, but no such theory has properly achieved such results while distinguishing itself enough to solve the problems besetting Einstein's theory. We don't know with certainty that GR accurately predicts the behavior of the universe in exotic scenarios that are untested by experiment. This is true for any scientific theory. However, I think it's quite instructive to look at these exotic scenarios through the lens of the most successful theory of physics because it helps ground speculative concepts in reality. In order to tackle time travel, I'll need to explain a few concepts fundamental to the theories of special and general relativity so that you have the requisite knowledge to understand what I'm talking about. Mass is the measurement of how much matter is contained in an object. It's not the same as weight, the apparent force of gravity an object experiences in a particular gravitational field. When you apply a force to an object, its mass helps determine its behavior. Gravity dictates the interaction between masses. It permeates the universe, allowing masses to influence the motions of each other at a distance. There are three key assumptions of general relativity for our discussion. Assumption 1. Observations of the universe depend on your relative reference frame, the position and motion of the observer. Changing your reference frame will change your observations, but the physical laws that govern your observations remain the same in all reference frames. This is best explained by Einstein himself. In an English translation of his book, Relativity, the Special and the General Theory, he writes, "Let us imagine a raven flying through the air in such a manner that its motion, as observed from the embankment, is uniform and in a straight line. If we were to observe the flying raven from the moving railway carriage, we should find that the motion would be one of different velocity and direction, but that it would still be uniform and in a straight line. Expressed in an abstract matter, we may say, if a mass m is moving uniformly in a straight line with respect to coordinate system k, then it will also be moving uniformly and in a straight line relative to a second coordinate system k prime, provided that the latter is executing a uniform translatory motion with respect to k. If relative to k, k prime is a uniformly moving coordinate system devoid of rotation, then natural phenomena run their course with respect to k prime according to exactly the same general laws as with respect to k. This statement is called the principle of relativity. That principle is why the theory is called the theory of general relativity. Assumption 2. The speed of light has a constant value in every reference frame. This seems to contradict the principle of relativity, however, it actually doesn't. The speed of light being constant is a law of nature, which is the same in every reference frame. It doesn't make sense intuitively if we imagine light flying like the raven, but experimental evidence has repeatedly and overwhelmingly proven that intuitive conception false. This is because not all reference frames experience time passing at the same rate, making light appear to be the same speed in all frames. We'll talk more about that later. Moreover, the first experimental verification of this on a large scale, the Michelson-Morley experiment, was the impetus for Einstein to formulate special relativity, which in turn led to the general theory. Special relativity describes the behavior of space-time when no mass is present. This is the simplest case of the general theory. Assumption 3. The universe has 3 continuous spatial dimensions and a 4th in time. Both special and general relativity conceive space and time as a single unified 4-dimensional geometry called space-time. According to GR, gravity and thus mass modifies the shape of spacetime, meaning the apparent motion we observe is the object taking the shortest possible path of motion through curved spacetime, rather than the force of gravity pushing it like a cart down a hill. The easiest way to conceptualize this is using the classic sheet demonstration. If we hold a blanket horizontally, it remains flat under tension until we place an object in the middle. This deforms the shape of the blanket, causing any ball we place on the now curved blanket to roll towards the object. Rather than the 2 dimensions of the blanket analogy, spacetime in general relativity is 4-dimensional. Time behaves like a spatial dimension, its curvature generating motion without the need for the external force of gravity. The apparent force of gravity we observe is simply the curvature of space and time interacting, causing objects to move. A key insight of general relativity is that even though light is massless, Nonetheless, it experiences the same curvature of spacetime that a massive object would. Light always takes the shortest path between 2 points of curved spacetime because it travels at the speed limit of causality within spacetime, what we call the speed of light. In general relativity, traveling through space faster than the speed of light is impossible. It is possible to travel between 2 points at an apparent speed faster than light, but this is only possible with exotic geometries like wormholes that bend spacetime to shorten the distance between points. You can conceptualize these geometries with general relativity, but they tend to require exotic matter with negative inertial mass, something we have no experimental evidence for. The most famous examples are the Alcubierre warp drive and Thorne traversable wormhole. The path an object takes through spacetime is called its world line. Because spacetime encompasses all of space and time, we can view the continuous path of an object through spacetime from its creation to its destruction as a single trajectory. Destiny 2's World Line 0 exotic sword is an explicit reference to the world lines of light in Relativity that travel at the cosmic speed limit. Gravity: An Introduction to Einstein's General Relativity by James B. Hartle explains. General relativity, the theory of space and time, supplies the principles for analyzing whether time machines are possible and practical. Relativity provides several examples of time machines that transport an observer to events in the future faster than other observers. The twin paradox setup is the simplest example. In the twin paradox, two twins, usually named Alice and Bob by convention, partake in a science experiment. Alice leaves on a rocket ship and accelerates to a high velocity near light speed. Eventually she decelerates, turns around, then returns home to Bob, who stayed home and remained stationary the entire time. The particular non-Euclidean geometry of spacetime dictates that if you accelerate closer and closer to light speed, time slows down. This means that Alice will arrive home noticeably younger than Bob. Alice has experienced a phenomenon unique to Einstein's theories called time dilation. General relativity predicts time dilating in gravitational fields, while special relativity predicts time dilating from moving at high speeds. Time dilation has been proven to occur in nature via experiment. The most practical example in human life is GPS. The satellites that are used to calculate your position in the global positioning system experience time faster than an observer on the surface of the Earth because they're in a region of Earth's gravitational field that's weaker compared to the surface. This means the clock experiences more time than it would at the surface of the Earth each day, so the clock needs to be corrected for its reference frame in order to accurately calculate the position of someone on the surface of the Earth. This is an oversimplification because the satellite also experiences time slowing down from its high orbital velocity. The effect of Earth's mass tends to outweigh the effect from the relatively small speed compared to light. Time dilation is not something we experience in our everyday lives because it only becomes noticeable at speeds close to the speed of light and is only relevant for GPS because the timing needs to be extremely precise for it to work. The speed of light is very fast compared to speeds humans are familiar with, like how fast a person can run or a car can drive. Light travels approximately 300 million meters per second, 1 billion kilometers per hour, or 670 million miles per hour. Time dilation's effects would only become perceptible to a human at so-called relativistic speeds, approaching roughly 1% of the speed of light. According to GR, it's not possible for an object with mass to travel at the speed of light, but if we imagine you could, you wouldn't experience time passing at all. Time would freeze until you slowed to subluminal speeds. My favorite example of realistic time dilation in science fiction is the movie Interstellar, where a team of astronauts travels to planets in the gravity well of a supermassive black hole. Because the immense mass creates a deep curvature, the astronauts visit a planet where every hour on the planet is 7 years of time on Earth. They spend 3 hours and 8 minutes on the planet, meaning 23 years pass on Earth. This leads to a dramatic character moment where astronaut Kabr, a father, mourns the 23 years of his daughter's life he missed, driving home the emotional cost of extreme time dilation on human relationships. It's an incredibly touching scene. We can calculate using special relativity that time dilation on the planet is equivalent to traveling at a constant speed of 99.992% the speed of light. All of the physics depicted prior to the climax of Interstellar is incredibly accurate, with a few minor exaggerations to make the movie look more cinematic. The computer modeling used to generate the visualization of the black hole was so cutting edge that the science team published an academic paper in a research journal about simulating the gravitational lensing effects of black holes. Based on general relativity, we must conclude that forward time travel is indeed very possible in our universe. All you would need to do is accelerate to near the speed of light or enter a deep gravitational well for a precise amount of time, allowing you to return much farther in the future for a stationary observer than your clock experiences. The reverse is not necessarily true. Hartle explains. What about traveling backward in time? The world line of an observer can't turn backwards in time because to do so, it would have to be moving faster than the speed of light at some point. The only way to travel backward in time to an earlier point in one's history is if space has closed time-like curves. It's possible to cook up spacetimes with this property, but there is no evidence that our universe has such an exotic topological structure, and, if energy is positive, general relativity prohibits the evolution of closed time-like curves in a space with a simple topological structure like the one we believe we live in. Thus, although it is possible in principle to go forward into the future, we probably cannot revisit the past, at least in the classical theory of gravity. A closed time-like curve is a world line that loops back upon itself, revisiting the same point in both space and time after the subject has experienced a significant amount of time from their perspective. It's the scientific way to describe time traveling and meeting your past or future self. Without exotic matter hitherto unverified by experiment, it's not possible to create a backwards time machine. The most common scientific justifications for time travel in science fiction are the wormhole geometries of general relativity. Physicists have cooked up many possible curvatures of spacetime to create wormholes within GR, but the most famous is the Einstein-Rosen bridge. This is a geometry that places a black hole at one end and a white hole at the other end. The black hole is a region with such intense gravity that no light is able to escape it beyond a certain point, causing the future of every object that passes through the event horizon to have the singularity at the center as a point in its future. A white hole is the time-reversed inverse of the black hole that appears as a bright white light that expels every object that entered the black hole outwards beyond the event horizon. The problem with this geometry is that there's no experimental evidence black holes have corresponding white holes anywhere in our universe. And the second complication is that the Einstein-Rosen bridge was never conceived for the purpose of time travel. It was instead devised for a paper laying out a now discredited attempt by Einstein and collaborator Rosen to explain the existence of elementary particles as tiny bridges between two different points of spacetime. In theory, Einstein-Rosen bridges could be used for wormholes to travel between two different points in spacetime. However, this comes with the caveat of tidal forces. Black holes are not always safe to enter. If you fell feet first into a black hole, your feet would experience a different gravitational force than your head. For smaller black holes, this difference is very significant and can apply such a large tidal acceleration that it'll rip your body into shreds in a process called spaghettification. That's literally the technical term. Supermassive black holes don't have this problem because they're very large compared to a human body, so the difference between your head and feet would be negligible. Tidal forces are an important consideration for time travel that's going to be used by humans or human-like aliens or robots. This has given rise to a concept in physics called the traversable wormhole, whose geometry was famously computed by physicist Kip Thorne, the principal scientific advisor on the movie Interstellar and one of the authors on that paper I referenced earlier. Even though these wormholes wouldn't kill someone who entered, they still require exotic matter to function. Most science fiction ignores the nuances of the tidal force issue and just calls their wormholes, teleporters, or time machine Einstein-Rosen bridges when they want to sound smart and scientific. It would be more accurate to call them Thorne bridges. I would argue it's pretty important to know you won't be torn to shreds when you walk through the portal created by your fancy new time machine. Because backwards time travel inherently breaks the causality of time and results in a number of paradoxes, different fiction deals with this in different ways. The cornerstone logical quagmire of closed time-like curves is the predestination or grandfather paradox. This paradox is usually framed in the following way. Suppose you build a time machine and travel back to visit your grandfather as a child. Not liking your grandfather very much, you decide to kill him. Now when history progresses, your grandfather doesn't grow up and meet your grandmother, meaning your mother is never born. She never meets your father and you are never born. However, this means you could never have built the time machine in the first place, meaning you could never have traveled back in time and killed your grandfather. This creates a logical contradiction. There are three primary ways fiction tends to resolve this paradox. The first assumes that the timeline is static, and even though backwards time travel is possible, you cannot change the past. This means whatever actions you want to take in the past already happened that way in your past. This removes the free will of time travelers and creates a deterministic universe. Frequently, writers use this as a twist and tragic character moment where someone travels back in time to try to prevent a tragedy and ends up being the cause of the event they try to prevent. I'm a sucker for this kind of character drama and usually enjoy it if executed well. A famous example of this is in the movie 12 Monkeys, where Cole sees a man die as a child, only for it to be revealed at the end of the movie that the man was his future self who was sent back in time to prevent a global pandemic. Cole's death and failure to prevent the apocalypse is a wonderful example of the tragedy of deterministic time travel. The second resolution of the paradox assumes that the timeline is malleable and can be altered via time travel. This type of time travel gives travelers free will, but also comes with the consequence that it's possible to change events in a way that prevents yourself from being born. The most famous example of this is in the movie Back to the Future, where Marty McFly accidentally prevents his parents from meeting and falling in love, causing him to spend the rest of the movie trying to get his parents to hook up to prevent himself fading from existence. Very Freudian. The third time travel paradigm preserves free will by invoking the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which says that each choice of quantum states creates a branching series of parallel universes. In this scenario, there's a world where every conceivable set of choices is made. There are multiple universes where you asked out your crush instead of holding it inside, and there's at least one where they said yes. In the many worlds version of the grandfather paradox, you are not literally changing your past. By time traveling, you have entered another world where your past is different, preventing a paradox from arising in the first place. A famous example is A Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury, where people travel back in time to see dinosaurs and accidentally kill a butterfly. Nothing happens to them personally, but when they return to the future, it's changed, and the English language is altered, being almost unrecognizable. They've created a new world by meddling in the past. Because these three paradigms are not necessarily mutually exclusive, a lot of time travel media takes elements of multiple paradigms. It's not entirely clear what paradigm Destiny time travel adheres to, however, we know time travel is malleable and multiversal. Characters have traveled back in time and even gotten stuck in time loops, most notably Elsie Bray, but I don't even have time to explain why I don't have time to explain. Rewriting history is very possible because inside the Vault of Glass, the Vex are able to rewrite history to their desire, as shown in the Gorgon's encounter. The The Gorgons are the most terrifying aspect of the Vault of Glass. They have the ability to wipe anyone who tries to interfere with the vault from history, making even their loved ones forget they existed. Being seen by a Gorgon is a fate worse than death, because if you die, your memory will at least live on while the people you impacted still live. However, being erased from history robs you of that right. There's something horrifying about beings so powerful they can change reality to their desire, and even change the memories of those they hate. It's the most pure and intense form of gaslighting a victim, not only making them question their own memory, but making the memories of everyone surrounding them change to fit the narrative they desire. The only possible scientific mechanism for this power is the wheel they're transporting themselves and the victim to a parallel reality where the victim never existed, and then killing them. This relies on the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics as referenced earlier, an interpretation of the theory that I will note has not produced unique experimental evidence for a multiverse. Regardless of the method being supernatural or scientific, the Gorgons prey on the fear of being forgotten. It's perfectly natural to fear your erasure. Humans are social animals. We evolved to prioritize harmony with local in-groups because we benefit from the protection, skills, and resources of the collective being shared with us. Being forgotten is just another form of the primal fear of ostracization. We fear being ostracized because prior to industrial civilization, not having social bonds with your community meant it was more likely you would die, whether that be from lack of food, water, shelter, or from not having others to help you ward off predators. In modern society, most people have such a specialized set of skills that they could not fend for themselves for an extended period in nature without the help of their community. I personally fear being forgotten because I have a deep-seated need to form relationships with people. I want to form a community and foster strong personal connections and bonds with people like myself, but that's hard to accomplish in the alienation of post-industrial late capitalism. I don't want to be isolated and forgotten. I want the people I care about to keep caring about me, and that need is one of the most human drives. It's why the epidemic of loneliness is such a problem. Making friends is hard, especially when social media makes it easy to have an abundance of impersonal, surface-level connections with others, which have often replaced the face-to-face socialization we evolved to need. However, having many people you know a little is not a sufficient psychological replacement for forming strong relationships. I'm constantly looking for people to form relationships with, but a lot of the time it feels like I'm shouting into the void or too afraid of rejection to be fully vulnerable, the ultimate form of social self-sabotage. The Gorgons make me wonder about all of our human ancestors, those who have been forgotten. We owe our existence to many of them, and yet most of us struggle to name people further back than a few generations. It makes me wonder how long any of us will be remembered for. I would be remiss not to mention the famous quote by David Eagleman. There are 3 deaths. The first is when the body ceases to function. The second is when the body is consigned to the grave. The third is that moment, sometime in the future, when your name is spoken for the last time. That final death, the loss of identity and legacy, is the most horrifying one to me. I want other people to care about me. I want to reap the benefits of being part of a community, and I want to leave a positive impact on the people around me and the world I share with them. I feel self-conscious about thinking that way, but it's a natural part of being human. I wish I could resurrect the names of my ancestors who are worth being remembered, both of blood and connection. Like those forgotten people, the Gorgons make me think of lost media. If you could erase an entire conscious being and rewrite the memories of thousands, it would be trivial to erase a piece of art. This erasure would be the most supreme act of censorship, an authoritarian dream. There are thousands and perhaps millions of books, paintings, sculptures, and other works of life that have been forgotten, lost to time, decay, and rot. We only know of a small number of these works who have died the second time, preventing people from enjoying their beauty, but cling on and fail to die that third metaphorical death due to surviving references elsewhere. Destiny itself has a lost media problem with sunsetting. It's not possible to play large swaths of the game's story and content that have quite literally been deleted from the game. Bungie has only slowly brought back bits and pieces of Destiny's lost media, but it's painful to me to know that there are hundreds of hours of story and gameplay that I will never get to experience due to their erasure. They've died the second death but failed to die the third time, being remembered by the people who played them and existing in surviving videos online. To play video games is to be subject to constantly having important pieces of art ripped away from you, as the industry is famously terrible at preserving its own history. There are numerous dead games which require servers to function that have been shut down, making the only way to experience them piracy. Live service games are particularly problematic for this, as the ground is constantly shifting. Sure, a lot of the time most of the core content usually remains intact as long as the game is profitable, but each patch changes history, rewriting memories via slight alteration, developers tinkering and changing things slightly. Most of the time this is ostensibly good and is to create a better gameplay experience, but sometimes it's insidious and driven by profits or intellectual property laws that prioritize money and property rights over the preservation of history. How are you supposed to find a true definitive work of art when there are hundreds of patches built upon the initial foundation? Which version of Destiny 2 would be the definitive historical one? Would it be the final patch in Season of Arrivals before everything was sunset? Would it be the first version of the game that was in its purest state? Would it be the version you could play today with all additions and removals? There are hundreds of states the game was in at various points in time that are all philosophically plausible. I don't want to give the impression that I hold the simplistic view that lost media is universally a tragedy. As I alluded to earlier, it's a bit more complicated. There are sometimes works that are better left forgotten, whether that be for despicable, hateful content, or because they would mislead us about our history. The case I'm most sympathetic to is when the existence of that media is a privacy concern for the author. Sometimes people accidentally reveal information that could threaten their safety, like an address, private personal information, or show parts of their body or personality that they would rather keep to themselves. Most reasonable people would agree that the original work should be modified to omit that information to avoid harming the author. It's more complicated when regret is involved. Who's to say that something you're comfortable sharing now may not be something you come to regret in the future? What if publishing that information now, especially on the internet where it's difficult to fully erase something, causes you pain and suffering in the future? I've experienced this personally. Being trans, I'm uncomfortable with other people seeking out images or recordings of me from before my transition. At the time, I was dealing with internalized self-esteem problems, so I overcompensated, trying to put myself out there publicly, in person, and online in ways that I wouldn't be comfortable with now. It makes me physically cringe and feel disgusted, ashamed, and embarrassed of my past self when other people use my dead name or show pre-transition photos, audio recordings, and more without my consent. This isn't a universal experience of trans people. I deal with a lot of post-traumatic stress, so it hits me particularly hard compared to some other people who might not care about other people seeing pre-transition stuff. It's a very complicated topic to navigate because other people have a right to those memories, but it also does me psychological harm to present them to people without my consent. I'm only comfortable sharing that history with people who are close to me and that I trust, and I don't want strangers to have a false impression of me or try to invalidate my existence using my history. Sometimes I wish the Gorgons could erase that history from everyone's memory, but other times I don't want that to happen, as those experiences, no matter how painful, made me who I am today. This experience makes me particularly compassionate to others' desires to have their pasts forgotten. Someone needs to have committed an act of egregious harm for me to not feel very sympathetic about striking that history from the record. People have a right to express themselves and curate their identity and legacy, especially in the internet age. It's such a fraught topic that some polities have even established legal rights to be forgotten. The most famous example is the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. According to an article from gdpr.eu, the right to be forgotten appears in recitals 65 and 66 and in Article 17 of the GDPR. The data subject shall have the right to obtain from the controller the erasure of personal data concerning him or her without undue delay, and the controller shall have the obligation to erase personal data without undue delay if one of a number of conditions applies. The protection of individual privacy is a noble goal. I would argue that the right to privacy is one of the most fundamental human rights. However, it does sometimes need to be balanced against public good if your right to privacy conflicts with the human rights of others. It's a particularly complex topic that's not easily navigated, especially when the internet is involved, and most of the nuance is removed to expedite a faux consensus. The idea of rewriting history to your benefit is so tantalizing that it's been revisited multiple times after the release of the Vault of Glass. Each time, a new faction decides that they should overwhelm the solar system by harnessing the power of the Vex, the Vault, and their simulations within it. This is a plan that has never worked, given that as soon as Ikora catches wind of it, destroying the faction and their Vex technology becomes priority number one for the Vanguard. The earliest example of this idea comes from the House of Wolves expansion, where the Elixni Kel Skolas seeks to take the Vault for himself and bring every member of his house that's existed throughout history into the present to overwhelm the Guardians and rule the solar system. He assaulted the Vault of Glass and harnessed the Vex network to achieve this goal. He was stopped by the Guardian and captured by the Awoken before his vision could fully be realized. In the post-campaign content of The Taken King, the Taken assault the Vault of Glass, which causes a time anomaly, making a radio signal from Praedyth momentarily able to be received by the Vanguard. The Guardian investigates, defeats the Taken, and uncovers Praedyth's corpse, sealed in the vault for hundreds of years. This mission, called Paradox, and its associated lore give us much of the detailed information we have about Kabr's Fireteam. We learn Praedyth outlived his companions substantially, and used his survival to aid humanity, ultimately helping them defeat the Vex. It's tempting to rewrite history, but it's such a powerful ability that if your enemies catch wind of the plan, they will do everything in their power to prevent you from achieving that goal. Praedyth spends an indeterminate amount of time in his cell within the Vault of Glass. He fiddles with his radio and tries to make contact with people outside the vault to give them the knowledge he's gleaned from observing the Vex. He sees chronology unwound by the Vex, and events that may be past, present, and future. He also sees visions of potential pasts and potential futures, not all of which come to pass in our timeline. Most of Praedyth's visions are fairly abstract, but I will attempt to interpret them. The first three fragments come from the Taken King's Grimoire cards. They all appear to reference ghosts that operate in a camera-like role. It's unclear if this is a cultural idiosyncrasy of post-Dark Age Earth, where ghosts are the primary tool used to capture images and video, or if the ghosts in the lore are intended to literally be there. A figure holds the ghost up, looking into the lens. Harsh light from an unfamiliar sun backlights the four-armed creature, making it impossible to see its face. Its massive head turns, and a clicking and chittering voice can be heard speaking to something off-screen. The lens refocuses beyond the creature's head as it talks, and a startling landscape climbs to the horizon. It's a paradise. Every inch of the land seems engineered, brushed by a sculptor's hand for form and function both. The sky is a light pink, spotted with clouds and crowded with ships. Thick lanes of aerial traffic soar through the air, tightly managed and seemingly endless. And beyond it all, above the clouds hangs a perfect alabaster sphere. This vision is almost certainly of Reese and the Elixni, given the descriptions of aliens that bear a striking resemblance to their species. The traveler hanging in the sky with an unfamiliar sun and a technologically advanced world sounds like Reese during the Elixni Golden Age, where they were blessed by the traveler. You see, before visiting humanity, the traveler visited many other species. It terraformed their planets and gave their inhabitants paracausal light-based technology. However, ghosts are unique. As far as we know, the traveler never gave another species ghosts until it granted them to humanity during our collapse, the end of the Golden Age, caused by the invasion of the Pyramid Fleet. Instead of fleeing like it usually did when the pyramids attacked, the traveler decided to tear itself apart and give humanity ghosts, sentient machines that bestow the light and can resurrect their chosen companions from the dead. If the ghost is literal, this could be a vision of an alternate future or past, where the traveler bestows the gift of ghosts to the Elixni instead of humanity. If it's not strictly literal, it could also be foreshadowing a future where the Elixni become light bearers, much in the same vein as the Hive during Witch Queen. Above all else, it probably was left intentionally vague so that writers could pick a direction later that they wanted to go in. That's a common tactic writers use to serialize their stories, releasing them piece by piece over the years. For all of these visions, the literal intent doesn't really matter. What's important is what it evokes and what it means to us. I find the second Grimoire card very uninteresting, so I'm not going to read any of it. The gist is that Praedyth sees a vision of Exos fighting the Vex on an unidentifiable planet, near the wreckage of a crashed Golden Age ship. This could be literally any destination in the solar system where Vex are present and where Guardians fight the Vex. Not all prophecies can be winners. A starfield, with a wash of power, a huge convoy of ships drops into reality from warp. A convoy of Guardian craft, hundreds strong. Ships of all sizes and shapes can be seen, from venerable craft that have been salvaged from the Golden Age, through to city designs, to vessels that have yet to emerge from the shipwrights' hangars. The ships are battle-scarred, many are barely space-worthy. As warp drives wind down, several seem to lose power and begin to drift. Some of the largest craft bear imagery familiar to frequent visitors to the tower. Every single ship, from the largest cruiser to the smallest personal craft, carries shards of stone, remnants of the city and the tower. The fleet is only visible for a few breaths, less than a minute. Then, with a massive flash of light, the fleet jumps on. The craft that have lost power are left behind, spinning and whirling away from the etheric wake of their powered fellows. This vision appears to be of Dead Orbit's fleet, a faction in the Last City who for years wanted to build a fleet to leave the solar system before the return of the Pyramid Fleet and second collapse. They fled the city after a failed coup attempt during the story of Season of the Splicer. It's implied they may have left the solar system, but their whereabouts are unknown. This also could be foreshadowing the events of the Red War, where the original Destiny 1 tower was destroyed and a new one had to be built, one that's still not finished 7 years later. This also could be an alternate timeline where Dead Orbit successfully convinces the entirety of the government of the Last City to leave. This also could be an allusion or reference to the Whirlwind, the Elixni odyssey across numerous solar systems after they lost the Traveler. The Whirlwind ultimately led them to Sol, where they found the Traveler. But in this situation, it could be humanity who's searching for the Traveler after it abandoned us. There's a lot of possible subtext here to be mined. The Aspect lorebook from Shadowkeep expands upon Praedyth's story. Most of the visions he mentions are either repeating existing visions we've already discussed, or fairly basic descriptions of events from Destiny 2 campaigns. One thing that is unique to this lorebook is we find out Praedyth came into contact with groups of simulated Ishtar researchers exploring the Vex network, but who became trapped in the vault. They talk, and Praedyth helps them build radios strong enough to penetrate the defensive shielding of the vault, which they use to send signals to the other copies of themselves. The lore explains. More copies of the Ishtar Collective team arrive. Their messages are getting out there, out to the ends of the Vex networks. The pulses are getting strong enough that Shim thinks they have a chance to boost data even beyond the network to physical reality. Instead of skimming along the top, riding the wave, the messages tumble through it and shake apart under its power. If they're getting strong enough to unravel data, it could be that they're getting strong enough to carry something heavier than a pile of code. It's worth a try, Praedyth thinks. Anything is at this point. Something is coming, a tidal wave's shadow looming over every timeline he can see. Its peak rises sharp over the earth, breaking the Terminator's arc with a deeper darkness. The city can't escape it. Praedyth carves messages into the last functional pieces of his gear, anything that can serve as a bottle for his messages, thrown out on time's ocean. He knows the wave is coming. More visions flicker past him now, burning afterimages into his eyelids. More timelines, a possibility or eventuality he doesn't know, lost to the encroaching dark. He knows they won't be able to handle it alone. He knows they need a warning. They need to know it's coming soon. Praedyth tries to use his contact with the Ishtar researchers to send his recordings of the return of the Pyramid Fleet to Sol so that he can warn the Vanguard before the second collapse. As far as I'm aware, this message never reaches the Vanguard in time before the second arrival of the Pyramid Fleet and the Witness's assault of the solar system. One thing I find interesting about this message is it uses the exact imagery shown during the Season of Arrivals when the pyramids approach different planets in the solar system. It also describes the arrival as a wave, using the language of the syzygy, the alignment of Fundament's moons and God wave brought to its oceans, portended by the worm gods in the Books of Sorrow. That's a story for another time, but I find it very interesting that so many elements of Lightfall's story were clearly planned this far ahead of time. As shown in the Paradox mission, Praedyth never escapes the Vault of Glass and dies there, though there may be remnants of his radio messages echoing into the future, allowing him to live on. The Vault of Glass is fascinating precisely because it defies logic and causality. The Vex dared to defy the natural flow of time in order to gain power over reality itself, a tyrannical power that they could not be allowed to possess. Nobody should be that strong, especially not a species that seeks to destroy all life that isn't themselves. That sort of strength could make anyone forget the impact their desires have on others, especially those who stand in their way. It's important to study history in order to prevent it from being erased or rewritten before our very eyes. After all, the easiest way history can be lost is simply the progression of time and lack of preservation. You don't need closed time-like curves or godlike control over reality to lose your past. I argue the key to understanding the Vex is that they are a metaphor. They represent the destruction and alienation brought upon by technology and industrialization. They are biological creatures who lack physical bodies, so use mechanical frames and circuitry to traverse the world. They seek to create a homogenized universe where every place is industrialized and all nature is destroyed. The Vex are a transformational agent like most biological creatures. When left unchecked, they grow and expand so aggressively that they begin to disrupt their environment and ecology. They convert nature into machine, metal, and concrete. Their manipulation of space and time to an extent that defies comprehension represents the alienation of a biological creature removed from its natural habitat, living in a mechanized society that provides comfort and wealth, but fails to provide the stability of the ecology the being was raised in. Under industrialized society, it's easy to become untethered in space and time, losing touch with physical reality because your brain doesn't know how to cope with its new, unfamiliar circumstances. The Vex are our fears of industrial society distilled into a simple, self-replicating, and yet wholly incomprehensible meme. They seek to even erase our memories of the nature we are so quickly losing. Don't be a Vex. If you're able to, spend a little time outside now and then. You may not even realize what you're losing until it fades to a memory or is forgotten completely. Thank you for watching. As always, you can find footnotes in the description and my bibliography and references. I just wanted to take a little time at the end of this video to say thank you. I've been blown away by the response to my Deep Stone Crypt video, so I definitely am going to be making more videos like that one and this one. The only problem is these videos take a really long time for me to make, and I make them in my free time when I'm not working at my day job, so I can't make them very quickly. It's been very cool to see the response to that video, because if I'm being 100% honest, I was kind of terrified when I uploaded it that no one would care, which would be kind of devastating after I spent 3 months working on that video. But it's really validating to see so many people care about this kind of content that I want to start making, which is very long form and high production value, and that I wasn't really confident enough to put the time into before now. Just wanted to say thank you again. This is eforme. Have a good one.